Hello, Redhead Whiskey here, and today I have a huge pleasure and honor to host Lisa Pope, brand ambassador for two of the brands, Glenmorangie and Ardbeg, um, two ends of the spectrum. I am very curious to hear about your journey. I met Lisa about a month or two ago, I think, in one of the whiskey festivals in New York, and it was a pleasure to meet. I tried the Glenmorangie ice cream, which I was approaching it with some, questions, and I was blown away by it. It was so good. And we're here to talk about your journey. So, welcome, Lisa.
Yeah, thank you so much. I appreciate it.
And so, tell us about your story. How did you get to the whiskey world? How did you get to be a brand ambassador? Why? Why whiskey?
Yeah, so my story is it's a bit winding, and please signal me if I'm talking too much. But I guess I'll start with my background in general. I'm originally from the Washington D.C. area, so I grew up in Northern Virginia and then lived in D.C. for a number of years. But this coming March will actually mark my 20th year in the wine and spirits industry. So I actually waited tables and bartended in the DC area, just putting together money for my undergrad. And that's
Hmm.
when I discovered that there was such a thing as the wine industry. I'd see reps come into bars and pull out wine bottles, and I thought that was absolutely amazing what they were doing.
Hmm.
My undergrad is in tech, and when I graduated, the market was not that good. So a few years later, I found myself interviewing for a job as an on and off premise rep in Washington, D.C., with a small distributor called Wine Partners, who is
Hmm.
now, if any of your listeners are familiar with the D.C. area, they're now a mid Atlantic distributor called Prestige LeDroit. And I stayed there for 7 years. And eventually, I wanted to go more into the corporate world. So I worked for Groupon back when Groupon was still one of these big mega startup tech, still one of the biggest companies in the world. And I worked for a new division for them, opening up and developing relationships in the on premise. Um, However, one of my sayings is that you can leave the wine and spirits industry, but it never leaves you. And I really missed being in the industry and the people that I knew. So I actually went back into the industry and worked for what is now Southern Glaciers in Washington, D.C. as an on premise rep. But Southern Glaciers in DC was pretty small back then, which is funny to think about because they were big everywhere else, but no one in DC knew who they were. So I was one of their only on-premise reps and worked with some of the very big restaurants and embassies and things like that in the DC area. And so worked there for about a year and a half. I felt like I was hitting a glass ceiling. I think I also was getting a hot foot because I also did a lot of backpacking when I was younger. But I decided to leave Southern and actually leave the country. And I put all my things in storage, sold my car, and I moved overseas to London with a short stint in Dubai. And
Wow, what brought you to? That's very courageous and very
crazy.
yeah. I love
um,
it.
I actually decided to put myself through an MBA program, which I'll still be paying for a very long time. But I just wanted to expand my horizons. I really love traveling, so I wanted to interact with other cultures and learn how those cultures interacted with each other. Not only on a personal level, but on a business and professional level. So I was overseas for about a year and a half, and then came back to the DC area. I wanted to stay overseas, but I just couldn't make it work with visas. Had a very bumpy ride back into the U.S. and finding jobs, and I, went back to a small distributor for a little while, but eventually left the industry and worked in corporate hospitality for a few years, in real estate, and then going into a global hospitality group. And that, took us up to COVID era. But
Mhm.
during that time, I always knew I wanted to come back into the industry. So I actually went to a bunch of networking events, went to networking events overseas, like Vinexpo Paris, the TFWA in Cannes. But, a bit of kismet. I went to Scotch tasting at Jack Rose in DC. And if people aren't familiar with Jack Rose, they're one of the premier whiskey bars, not only in DC, but probably the US and really
Mhm.
the world. And it was a Glenmorangie and Ardbeg tasting. And when I saw it advertised, I remember contacting a friend and saying, "You're coming to this tasting with me because I'm going to meet these people." So it turned
Wow.
out the people that were holding the tasting and leading the tasting were the team that I eventually ended up working with. And after the tasting, I went up to the gentleman leading the tasting, who is now my manager, and I said, I really want to do what you're doing. And a few months later, a lot of back and forth. They had an opening on their team, and here I am. So that's how I ended up in the industry.
That is kismet.
Yeah, yeah. So
That
a
is
long,
kismet.
winding road.
What was your first whiskey that got you to fall for whiskey?
My first whiskey, and I would say it wasn't necessarily a whiskey, but it was more so an experience I had with
Mhm.
whiskey. When I was working for wine partners, I think about 60% of my portfolio was wine and 40% was spirits.
Mhm.
And I think, with a lot of reps, they become comfortable selling wine, but not the other side of it. And I was definitely there as
Okay.
well. And I remember being in one of those Friday meetings and got handed this pre-sale sheet for signatory scotch. And I said, I have no idea what this is and how am I supposed to sell it? But I was fairly comfortable with the job up to that point. I'd been in the position for a few years.
Mhm.
And I, did a little bit of research on signatory. Still didn't really understand it at the time, or the significance of signatory. And again, for those people who may not be familiar with signatory, they're one of the premier independent bottlers in the world. They're very highly regarded,
Mhm.
working with different distilleries. But I went out to my accounts and said, "Hey, this is a pre-sale for Scotch. Can you tell me, about it and which ones you would choose, things like that." So that really put on a light bulb in my head about whiskey. And there's this whole other world out there to learn about. And
Mhm.
a few years later, when I was working for Southern, there were some whiskeys in their portfolio, and I don't remember exactly which one, but we represented Kavalan whiskey out of Taiwan. And I remember going to a bar and tasting a Kavalan. I don't remember which one, but again, that was like another light bulb to me, saying,
Mhm.
whiskey is really interesting. Not only is whiskey from Scotland, but whiskey can be from Taiwan. It can be from other places.
Yeah,
And that really, opened my eyes to the industry.
that's beautiful. So tell us a little bit about the role of being brand ambassador. What does it mean? Challenges. What do you enjoy?
Yeah, being a brand ambassador, you wear a lot of different hats every day.
Mhm.
No day is ever alike. And, for me, I think when I decided to become a brand ambassador, when I finished graduate school and I came back to the US, I was trying to think of, what roles would be a really good fit. What can I do where I can use some of this business sense that I learned, but
Mhm.
still interact with, customers, still interact with trade, do interesting events, incorporate travel because obviously I wanted to travel as well, and that's when I discovered the brand ambassador role and what it is.
Mhm.
And I think in a nutshell, being a brand ambassador is really, winning the hearts and minds of people and exposing people, whether it's people within your company, the trade, meaning, people in restaurants, people in the off-premise and retail stores, and customers and consumers, exposing them to your brands. So every day you're doing different things to make that happen. So, being a brand ambassador to me, it's, really just embodying my brands and being the face of my brands and putting my brands, in the best light possible. So people understand more about the brands, whether or not they've been fans of Glenmorangie and Ardbeg for years, or it's their first time ever hearing about my brands or even Scotch whiskey in general.
These are two such different brands. I'm so curious about. We're going to meet in 3 days. You're going to join our club in Hoboken for a tasting. Everybody's crazy over it. It's overbooked already. I'm going to see how I'm going to squeeze in everyone in the room. But I'm very curious to see, and I'm curious to hear from you about. These are so significantly different. They're so different from each other. How do people respond to it? How do you promote two different worlds?
Yeah, so I think I'm extremely lucky to represent two such different yet complementary brands. And I guess just, quickly, discuss the two brands for people who may not be familiar. Glenmorangie and Ardbeg are actually sister distilleries. A lot of people don't know that. Glenmorangie bought Ardbeg back in 1997. Ardbeg had been mothballed and had a very roller coaster type of history for a number of years.
Mm-hmm.
And then in 2004, Moët Hennessy bought Glenmorangie and Ardbeg together. So that's how they are now together.
Mm-hmm.
So Glenmorangie is located in the Highlands, more specifically in a town called Tain. I think,
Mm-hmm.
the profile for Glenmorangie is, very light, very floral, very elegant. For a lot of people, it's the very first whiskey they've ever had, and it's a global whiskey. They've been exporting since, I believe, 1860. So whether or
Mm-hmm.
not you're down the road or somewhere overseas, you'll find Glenmorangie. I remember being in Greece, I think last summer, and seeing it on various back bars, and everywhere I traveled to, I've seen Glenmorangie. Now on the opposite spectrum, and really on the opposite side of Scotland, is Ardbeg. So Ardbeg is located on the Hebridean island of Islay, and Islay is right off the southwest west coast of Scotland. And Ardbeg is, very bold, very big, very peaty in style, and a bit, unorthodox and untamed. So a complete 180 from Glenmorangie itself.
Mm-hmm.
However, both distilleries really have their roots in tradition, and they try to hold on to that tradition while still, innovating. Both Glenmorangie and Ardbeg are probably two of the most innovative distilleries within Scotch whiskey right now. And, that's for a number of reasons. And definitely, the two biggest reasons are because of our master distiller, who's a 5-time master distiller, Dr. Bill Lumsden, along with our master blender, Jillian McDonald, and they oversee both distilleries itself. But, Glenmorangie and Ardbeg, very different in style, very light with Glenmorangie, very peaty with Ardbeg, and presenting them are just such a pleasure and a joy. Um, most people, they are either not fans of Scotch at all, or they're fans of Glenmorangie and not Ardbeg, and vice versa.
Mm-hmm.
So I find, presenting both of these whiskeys together, it does a few things. For people who have never experienced Scotch, or they're kind of curious, it's really a light bulb. They don't realize, they always think Scotch is going to be, very, medicinal, very smoky. And Ardbeg is that. But what we do is
Very much.
balance that. Yeah, very much so. We balance that smokiness and that peatiness with sweetness, hickory smoke, things like that. So to be able to experience that smoky style that they've always been slightly put off by, and taste something that's really well balanced and approachable, it kind of is it's a light bulb for them. And then to also taste Glenmorangie and not realize that there are very light floral styles of Scotch is also a light bulb for people just getting into whiskey.
Mm-hmm.
And then for our current fans, there's always something new, and we're always innovating. Like you mentioned, a tail of ice cream. You were a bit hesitant to try it, but
Yeah, I'm a smoky. I prefer the smokier palate, the intense palate. But it did feel like ice cream. It was sweet and creamy and round. I was surprised. So when you approach someone who has not tasted it, whiskey, and is a little hesitant, do you have a statistic around from your gut or a numbers? Is there a preference to start with smoke and move to the sweeter, or the other way around?
The other way around. Whenever I'm doing a tasting, always, start with Glenmorangie. It's easier for people to wrap their head around. And then,
Mm-hmm.
just as far as tasting in general, you're going to start with, a lighter style
Right.
first, and then work your way down.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. However, when I am doing, your bigger tastings, for example, you and I met, I believe it was at whiskey.
Whiskey night. It was a Friday,
Yes, yeah,
and
at the
the
Bowery.
hotel. That the name of the hotel escapes me, but
Yeah. But in events like that, in situations like that, I'm not gonna. If people want to start with Ardbeg, I'm not gonna tell them no.
yeah.
For a lot of people, for what I do, the biggest thing is that I want people to trust their instinct and their palate.
Mm-hmm.
So, I'll make suggestions, but if people tell me they want A, I'm gonna say, okay, let's go with A, and then we'll work from there. And if someone tries Ardbeg Ugadal first, and then
Mm-hmm.
they say, oh, what's this Glenmorangie original about? I'll let them try Ugadal first, and then, after they try that and they see Glenmorangie Original on the table, I'll let them try that too. Their palate may not pick it up the best way possible if they had started with the original first, but I want people to feel comfortable.
Yeah, you're working with the audience.
Yes,
So
absolutely.
you're working with with us, the consumers, with whiskey clubs, with stores, and with restaurants. That's many different audiences with different wants and needs. How do you balance that as a brand ambassador?
A lot of planning. People see brand ambassadors at events. You go out and do a staff training. You saw me at a whiskey festival. But there's a lot that goes into the background. And then we also have, our teams, like our brand managers, brand activation teams, things like that. So they kind of make this all possible. But really just balancing your schedule. And if you're just getting into this industry, it's going to be really difficult at first. I will say the fact that I've worked in this industry for a while, and I have experiences, working in restaurants, having tasted with retail buyers over the years. It makes it easier to understand what each of these groups of people are looking for when I present to them. So a presentation to a wait staff is going to be very different from the presentation that, for instance, I'm going to do with your group on Thursday. So, for example, I have a staff training later on this afternoon, and I'm going to talk more about how the Glenmorangie Ardbegs we're tasting, pair with the different, menu items. But I'm also going to talk about the background of both brands. Whereas, when I do the presentation with your group, it's going to be more about, the process of making. We'll go more into detail about making the scotch and the history, things like that. Whereas with the staff training, I'm lucky if I have 5 to 10 minutes to speak, so I have to kind of tailor it that way.
Oh, so interesting. So you've been in the industry for such a long time, and just like you say, in a way, it's that's great because it's easier for you to work with it because you understand the industry. But I always wonder, how do you keep the passion, and you're not like, oh my God, I can't, another whiskey, I can't do it anymore because I'm asking about myself. I'm excited about it today. Will I be bored in 2 years?
Right. Well, it is a job. There's definitely times where you're frustrated with different things. Especially, I work for a corporate company, so there's a lot of different things that I am dealing with. But I feel like there's not a lot of industries like this industry. Wine and spirits, where there's so many different facets of it and so many different aspects. Being a brand ambassador is one part of it, but I'm in our office today, and in a few doors down is the finance team, and then there's facilities, things like that. So there's a lot of different paths in this industry. But, we're dealing with products that have such a storied past. There's so much history that go into the products that we're representing, and even though there's so much history, there's so much innovation and so much technology. For example, I did an event last week at Google headquarters. So I spoke about, Glenmorangie Ardbeg, and I kind of weaved in how technology within the Scotch whiskey industry has progressed over the years. So there's just so much going on in this industry. So you just have to, keep thinking about the fact that at the end of the day, you're representing, amazing products with amazing history. And, it's a lot of fun. There's definitely fun events and things like that, but you can still use your business sense as well. So there's a lot of ways to balance a career in this industry.
So throughout 2024, have you noticed any trends in whiskey drinking, and what are you thinking? Where are we heading towards 2025? What are going to be the leading trends?
Yeah, with trends, I leave it to like our business team to deal with those things as far as, things are seeing. But, I can say, people are still are very interested in Scotch. When I do events, people are just super excited about, being there, experiencing, some of our tried and true expressions, and as well as, a lot of our innovations as well. And there's just so many new consumers to the Scotch whiskey industry that are, might be coming from, bourbon or tequila, and they've had a wonderful experience with those spirits, and now they're looking to try something new. So
Mhm.
I see a lot of opportunities in the coming year for Scotch whiskey.
Do you see preference for blends or single malts or single casks or Amarone or, especially I love the connection between the smoky and the wine finishes. Do you see anything there in flavors?
Yeah, I mean, I think from my perspective, because as an ambassador, it's more me, going out and educating and those trends and things like that. We have a team that handles,
It does that.
for that data. But from what I see, people are just interested across the board. There's a lot of new things out there right now. Like you're seeing things, aged in really interesting wine casks that we haven't seen before. And then, still the blends are, as popular as ever. So just it's all across the board, at least from my purview.
Thank you. So, is there anything that I did not ask and you want to mention?
I think you've asked some great questions. But I think that the one thing I will mention, when I do tastings, and I was thinking about this, the one thing I'm always asked is, what's your favorite? And it's almost like asking, who's your favorite kid? You can't really choose one. And
Mhm.
when people ask me this question, I usually say, well, yeah, I don't know, what time is it? For me, I like to tell people, when you're exploring, whether it's Scotch, whiskey, or other spirits, to always keep an open mind. I think we all have our default, we have our favorites that we always go to.
Mhm.
But I think especially in a position like this, when you're exposed to so much, you can always, try and taste different things. And tastings are really one way to expose yourself, but it's kind of a safe way to do it. But I love to tell people, to always keep an open mind to trying new things that
Mhm.
maybe you never thought about trying before, because in your mind you have just always told yourself you won't like it, or maybe something that you have tried in the past and you said, no, I don't like that.
Yeah.
Our palates change over time, and our mindsets change over time, and there's
Mhm.
things I've had in the past and didn't like, and then revisited again, and it's kind of grown on me. And I definitely say that, with representing Ardbeg, for example, where a lot of people may not necessarily be attracted to that smoky style. I tell people always revisit it once in a while, because either your palate might change, or there might be an Ardbeg expression out there you just haven't tried yet that really might resonate with you. And
Yeah.
that goes not just for Ardbeg, but all types of spirits. And it's really the way that you expand your palate and expand your mind in this industry. So, just keep an open mind and always revisit and retry new things.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And it is about that light bulb moment where something that you thought you didn't like actually tastes amazing and you're so surprised. And when you see it on someone's face, I think that's the win, right? That's the
Yeah,
best moment.
absolutely.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Lisa. So we made it to the 30-minute mark. So that's really good. That's really good. So I'm gonna end the recording. Well, thank you so much for joining us. So
No, no, thank you. No, this is great, and I really appreciate it, and I appreciate you, thinking of me with an interview and stuff like that.
for sure. For me, I mean,